I want to welcome everybody. My name is Radhika Dave. I'm with UNDP's Climate Hub, Senior Technical Advisor for the Adaptation Team and focal point for nature-based solutions for adaptation. I want to welcome everyone to the 7th APA webinar organized by UNDP's Climate and Nature teams with support from the BIOFIN Biodiversity Finance Initiative and SCALA initiatives. APA is the United Nations Secretary General's Adaptation Pipeline Accelerator initiative, which is supporting enhanced access to adaptation financing in different countries. And as part of this initiative, UNDP has been organizing a series of global exchanges with partners on ways of accelerating adaptation and accelerating finance to adaptation. And today's webinar is the latest in the series, and which focuses on integrated solutions for nature and climate change adaptation, particularly given the numerous publications, recent publications, including IPCC's report from 2023 that underlines the interdependence between climate change, ecosystems, biodiversity, land degradation, and the need for integrated solutions across these areas, which has been highlighted as an urgent need. Nature-based solutions, for instance, play this role to address the interlinked crises. And this has been recognized across board and is reflected in 105 NDCs, nationally determined contributions, and over half of all the maps, which have either ecosystem-based adaptation or nature-based solutions as proposed solutions. So there is an increasing effort to mainstream and scale up nature-based solutions as an integrated approach to address the interlinked crises of climate change impacts, adaptation needs, and biodiversity and land degradation issues. However, the challenges remain, and these include institutional, technical, and financial. And today's discussion, today's panelists will focus in on exchanging information, particularly related to the financial aspect. And so we'll hear from 5 panelists, 5 speakers on various tools, frameworks, and finance solutions, which can promote, which are being used, and which can be used even further to promote mainstreaming of nature-based solutions. So I want to introduce our speakers. We'll start with Alexander Wise. He's a senior structuring advisor, and he will set the stage for today's discussion with a framing presentation on adaptation, nature, and finance nexus. We also have Eva Bortolotti from UNDP's Nature team, who will focus on financing mechanisms. We have Nora Negeni with UNEP, who's the project manager for the Global Ecosystem-Based Adaptation Fund, and will share experiences from that, from the fund's various initiatives. We then have a few minutes for question and Q&A, and then we go into country experiences. We have Annabelle Trinidad, who's a senior technical advisor with the Biodiversity Finance Initiative, and will share experiences from the Philippines and Indonesia. And finally, we have Berhanu Asefa, who's a national coordinator for the SCALA initiative, and will share experiences from Ethiopia. I just want to flag a couple of logistical notes. Each speaker has 7 minutes to share their interventions, and the webinar is being recorded, and also there is simultaneous interpretation in French and Spanish. So with that, I would like to welcome Alexander Wise to get us started. Sasha, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Let me put my presentation on screen. Here we go. So So when we conducted recently a report on how climate adaptation and nature can be combined into a channeled approach, which can be looked into or financed through financial institutions. And at the end, what the key idea or the key idea is that climate adaptation and nature are quite interconnected. They're both very localized. So if you look into nature-related interventions, they have always local context, and we need to break down them from global perspective into local intervention perspective. Same is true for climate adaptation, especially if we look into in relation to climate disasters, natural disasters. And what we see is that if the interventions are quite, they're affecting each other. And at the end, if we have healthy natural ecosystems, then they will provide help for adaptation and to adapt to climate impacts. And this is quite an important point. So this interconnectedness. So one example which we have here are mangroves, which on the one side provide important habitats for fish and birds, but on the other side help protect coastal communities from storm. So they can absorb quite significant amount of wave energy in case of a hazard event. And if we want effectively finance solutions, then we need to look into both from a combined perspective. So we created a selection methodology for finance solutions. So our approach was to start with 156 solutions which are on the BIOFIN website and related to nature, and create a questionnaire on how this can be, the solutions can be selected, which reflect nature-related issues, financing of nature-related issues, as well as climate adaptation-related issues. And one is interdependency, one is the formulation of climate adaptation benefits within the solution. Then we had activities and measures. So can we measure it? Can we replicate it? Can we scale it, the solution? So these were the different levels we have to look into in order to identify the most optimum solutions for tackling the twin challenge of biodiversity or nature decline and climate. Then we've tried to look into positive examples which combine both climate adaptation and nature, for example, nature-based solutions and payment for ecosystem services and other similar solutions. We looked into the interdependencies. And at the end, what we identified on our side, we said, okay, there are quite many, and I will come to this point later on again, there are quite many financial solutions which can be used for climate adaptation and for nature. And we selected the most common ones, which we would like to start looking into addressing both challenges through a financial product lens. One is, and this is on the bottom, the adaptation and nature budget tagging. And this is on sovereign level. So if you look into the budgeting of a government from Ministry of Finance perspective, then tagging adaptation and nature within the, from an expenditure, from a budgeting perspective, makes quite a lot of sense and gives the ground or the fundament for understanding how much is spent on both adaptation and nature, and what is the gap resulting from that. Another instrument which we identified, which quite easy to implement and which could incorporate both aspects of climate adaptation and nature are sustainability-linked bonds. And sustainability-linked bonds, they work in a way so the bonds have KPIs attached to it. And if KPIs are met, then there's a reduction of the coupon of the bond. And if their KPIs are not met, then there's there can be an increase in the coupon of the bond. This is quite an easy instrument where we, by using different KPIs, can easily implement both adaptation aspects as well as nature-related aspects within one solution. Payment for ecosystem services in itself, given the definition of payment for ecosystem services and the way they implement it in different countries, can act as a centralized instrument for revenue generation in order to finance or to make the intervention investable for, especially for private sector. So payment for ecosystem services, these are instruments which are more on the revenue generation side rather than a financial instrument itself. And then the last one, and these are not new products. The last one is an outcome-based PPP, public-private partnership. And this is, again, this is where we, on the basis of KPIs, where we can select outcome-related payments or outcome-based payments in order to finance adaptation and nature-related solutions. So the focus, and this is what we've heard from different financial institutions we've been speaking to during the study, is that financial institutions look as of now into climate and nature in a siloed form, but their first attempts from some of the financial institutions and different stakeholders who are trying to combine, who see the benefits of combining climate adaptation and nature, and are moving from institutional setup into addressing the twin crisis instead of just addressing one or another issue. So, as a result of the study, what we can.
Sorry, Sasha, I'm going to
yes.
just give you an indication of the time. We have 1 minute left. Yeah.
Yes, I'm nearly finished.
Right. Okay.
I'm nearly finished. So there are key outcomes. Number one, combining nature and climate adaptation is quite crucial to solve the twin crisis. So we need to move to this approach. There's no shortage of financial solutions. So out of the 156 we identified, 67 have high adaptation benefits in addition to nature benefits. But, and this is what we're missing right now, we need to create a directory of climate nature related targets and KPIs, which address both challenges. And as I mentioned before, some of their organizations are already moving to this solution, moving to addressing the twin challenge. And this is where this is our opportunity to get more finance into the climate nature nexus. Thank you very much. This was quite a quick summary of what we've done. The study is more extensive, obviously. Thank you very much for taking the time to listening to this important topic.
Thank you, Sasha, and definitely I hope some of the nuances come out in the question and answer session that we will have shortly. But thanks for that initial framing presentation. I want to invite Eva now. Eva, the floor is yours.
Thank you, colleagues. Hi, everyone. So let me share quickly my screen. Here we are. I hope I can see it. So I will speak a bit more about the role that disclosure reporting frameworks can have in the context of climate and nature-related adaptation for businesses and financial institutions. So looking a bit more at the private sector specific side. And I usually like to start when I speak about this topic on kind of the reflection on how nature is really the bedrock of our economic prosperity and societal well-being. The international agreed climate goal of 1.5 degrees cannot be achieved without better governance of nature, right? And I think a report that is always very useful to check out is the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report. These are the results from last year. And you can see here that the loss of biodiversity and the failure to act on climate change are really at the top of the gravest risk on the long term for humanity. So all the environmental risks really dominate. You see all the green ones here, the long-term risk for human beings. So climate change and natural loss impact economies locally, nationally, and globally. We should also consider that it is estimated that more than half of global GDP is highly dependent on nature, that also ecosystem collapse will cause trillions in annual decline of global GDP. And it has already been proven that the climate change-induced weather events and climate events have already been causing millions of losses daily over the past 50 years. So these are very clear numbers that really prove the case here that the climate nature crisis is really interconnected and causing some also economic threats and losses for our economic system. Financial institutions and corporates are starting to realize that climate change and biodiversity risk can impact the profitability of our businesses. And we can see it in daily news every day. They're also starting to realize that their business and investments are dependent on the environment and often can have negative impacts on the environment, right? But also that climate and nature-based solution can also be a financial opportunity, right? So financial institutions starting to talk about nature as a new asset class. We have seen biodiversity aligned funds having jumping assets in the last years. And it is been estimated that a nature positive economy could generate up to 10 trillion in annual business value by 2030. So this is all becoming very, very real for businesses and financial institutions. But what does exactly this risk mean? There are many types of risks. We know that. There could be physical risks, transition risks, more systemic risks, both related to climate and nature. I just brought an example here in the agricultural sector, since it's one of the sectors that I know we often work on at UNDP in the context of adaptation. So this is the case of the almond industry in California, which basically relies on bee pollination. But currently, the areas for the almond industry productions tend to have a very poor habitats of bees because of the use of fertilizers and other like climate change induced events. And therefore the decline in bee pollination caused increase in production costs for the company and therefore hyper cost and potential losses for the business. So this is just a kind of mini case study to give you an example of a type of risks. There are many more, but this is one of the common, I would say, physical risks that we speak about when we look at the agricultural sector. So adaptation really presents opportunity for businesses to achieve efficiency gains and avoid financial losses. So on the revenue side, we can support climate-related risk decision-making or enhancing preparedness for climate and natural hazards, and also reducing risk and vulnerability for those more high-risk sectors and communities that are exposed to climate change and nature loss. But at the same time, they can also cause cost savings and sustainability opportunities for companies that by implementing ecosystem management practices across their operations and value chains. So we really see an opportunity that adaptations can be really also an opportunity for businesses and financial institutions. But then where can businesses and financial institutions start? And I know this is a very scary graph, so please don't run away. But I think it also gives you the idea of all the different instruments like reporting, sustainability reporting, standards and instruments that are out there. And these are tools available for businesses and financial institutions, and there have been a proliferation, as you can see, in the last years. Actually, the climate-related ones started quite early. You can see here already back in 2005 with the climate disclosure board, and then the launch of the task force on climate-related financial disclosure in 2015, while the biodiversity and nature-specific one are more recent. TNFD final recommendations have been launched in 2023, and for example, also GRI standards just this year. However, we see also a positive tendency of convergence here at the bottom in terms of some frameworks and standards that have been kind of aggregated under the IFRS Foundation, under the International Sustainability Standard Board, which is now becoming one of the major international standards for sustainability. So of course, we won't be seeing all of this today, so much the slides will be made available. But I think
Emma, sorry, the interpreters are asking for slightly slower
speaking slower, sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, no problem.
And you have about 3 minutes, okay?
Yes, we're about at the end. So, so of course, the four major ones that I think are relevant when we speak about climate and biodiversity are the TCFD related to climate risk, the TNFD related to nature risk, and this is, by the way, supported and founded also by UNDP, the GRI that already provide both nature and climate standards, and the International Sustainability Standard Board, which for now focuses on climate, but as announced, that will be soon working also on biodiversity-specific standards, and has already incorporated the TCFD framework in it. So for us, that we work at the UN in the context, of the international policy goals, I think this is very important because basically we have the TCFD, that is the instrument more to operationalize, I would say, the Paris Agreement for businesses and financial institutions, and the TNFD on nature, that is to operationalize the Global Biodiversity Framework, specifically Target 15, that focuses on disclosure for the private sector. Then basically these frameworks and standards, they feed into global standards at the GRI and the IFRS that I mentioned before, which already incorporate many elements of the standards. And then they feed into regulations, national regulations. The most famous ones currently is the European one, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Of course, the European one already integrates for climate and nature, but we should not only think that this is a European trend. There are many countries that are thinking or are starting to think and will soon be making mandatory disclosure requirements, including, for example, Costa Rica, I think from next year, India already doing some work on listed companies, and the Philippines. So basically, soon this will feed into the work of financial regulators around the world. Each frameworks, so this is the case specifically of climate and biodiversity, and how can we make it more interconnected? And for example, TCFD and TNFD on climate and nature respectively are designed to really be aligned. So they're both built around 4 pillars: governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics. In yellow, you can see the similarities, in green, the differences, but this is just to see that it is an instrument already out there for climate and nature integration, and the alignment of those areas can really allow businesses to build integrated strategies in an easy way, because they are instruments designed to be aligned from the very beginning. You can already see and find online, these are just some examples, integrated reports published by businesses. So these are climate and nature integrated reports. I'm not saying they're necessarily the best. There is much work to be done, but this is a trend that is starting, and integrated reporting is happening already. And this trend is really driven by investor demand for transparency, but also by regulatory pressure. As I mentioned before, we have been seeing countries doing regulatory action. And I think a very good relevant example, even if not mandatory, are the recent guidelines published by the Botswana Stock Exchange. These are just guidelines, as I say, not mandatory regulation, but they do incorporate both the climate and the nature frameworks, so TNFD and TCFD, and they provide to listed companies in Botswana, we know a very biodiverse country, so especially relevant in this context, both metrics and targets that cover climate, so greenhouse gases and so on, as well as biodiversity. And this is already well integrated and available to use, published just a few weeks ago. So I think very interesting. I skipped this for brevity. And just to conclude, I wanted to say that, for example, as BIOFIN, we started doing national disclosure readiness studies in different countries to really assess market readiness and understand how we can uptake the adoption of this type of disclosures. They are mostly focused on nature, but you will see if you read the reports, they're available online. Very often climate is really the starting point, both on the regulatory side, or the companies that are getting going on climate first, and then they move to nature. So just to wrap up, I know I've been going very quick, but I didn't want to take some time. We can take more questions later. But just to key takeaways, so by adapting and building resilience to climate change and nature loss, business can mitigate risks to their operations and value chains, but they can also capitalize on opportunities by investing in climate change adaptation and nature-based solutions. And now we see really a tendency of establishing joint strategy of climate change and nature, both also in reporting and disclosure, as we've seen from the reports, also because of the increasing regulatory pressure at the country level in different jurisdictions. So we might see more of this coming in the future from also financial regulators. So that's it for today. Thank you very much, but I have to take questions later if needed.
Thank you, Eva. That was very interesting, and it'll be really good to hear a few more thoughts on the integration between the two, the TCFD and the TNFD in terms of the results on the ground. So I hope we can get into that discussion. I want to invite now Nora Negeni from UNEP. Nora manages the Global Ecosystem-Based Adaptation Fund at UNEP and has worked over the last 8 years, 10 years almost, in dryland management and climate change resilience. Nora, over to you to share lessons and experiences from the Global EBA Fund.
Right. Thank you very much, Radhika. Just sharing my screen. I hope you can all see it.
Yes.
Perfect.
Clear.
Okay, so thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody from wherever you're joining us. Thank you so much to UNDP for inviting me to be part of this webinar today, and it's quite an exciting webinar and topic. So my name is Nora Ngeny, as I've just been introduced, and I work with UNEP, the Global EBA Fund project, which I will talk about a little more. And it's actually great that I came to talk after Eva, because she has given the perfect introduction to the links between nature and climate. And this fund is essentially funding that, how to harness nature to address climate challenges related to climate change. Okay, so I'll jump straight into it. So I'll give you a bit of a background about the fund. The Global EBA Fund was created in 2021 and is set to run until 2028. And it's essentially a catalytic fund. It's supposed to be a catalytic mechanism to support ecosystem-based adaptation as an approach. This can be done in order to mainstream scale-up actions related to ecosystem management. So we use the definition by CBD, by the Convention on Biodiversity on EBA, about using nature, using biodiversity to help people to adapt to the impacts of climate change. So the fund is implemented jointly by UNEP and IUCN and funded by Germany's ICI, the International Climate Initiative. So our fund has three main objectives. All the projects that we fund, we provide grants or funds to small-scale projects or for small grants. And we have three key objectives, as you can see there. One is related to awareness raising, knowledge building, capacity building. The second is related to governance, planning, and gaps in policy, as well as regulatory environments. And the third is related to sustainable financing. So all the projects that apply to the fund have to align to these three key objectives. In addition to that, we also have three pillars that you can see on your screen. So these pillars are levers for change, functional data and science, and the last one is innovations. So all projects have to address why, which is the objectives, and how, which is the pillars that you can see over there. So different projects, for example, policy, capacity building, financing, etc. Would be addressed under pillar 1. Under pillar 2, you can look at modeling, you can look at indigenous and traditional knowledge systems and use that, and technologies, and use that as a basis for data collection, as well as different innovations that people may propose. So our projects, we have about 40 projects right now in the portfolio, and we shall continue to bring on board more. We shall have about 100 by the time we finish. We've had 7 calls for proposals. Some from number 5 to 7 are still undergoing review, and so we'll have quite a number joining the portfolio within the next 6 months or so. Now on to maybe just jump straight into an example of projects that we've had, because as I mentioned, the project, this fund has been running from 2021. So we're going to look at 2 examples. And I said Eva gave a fantastic introduction, because it just says these projects have been working using nature to adapt and build resilience for the communities that they work with. The first one that you see on the screen here is from the Philippines, and it's on managing coral reefs and just marine ecosystems. It's implemented by Blue Finance. They also call Blue Alliance, I believe. And this organization works closely with local communities. They work with the government to mobilize investments for ecosystem-based adaptation action. And they work in particular with private sector in the locality, where they are trying to increase local access to finance using the local private sector organizations. This project in particular received about 250,000 from the fund, and they have been implementing between February 2022 and they completed implementation in December of 2023. So this project itself recognized the importance of the marine ecosystems for livelihoods and recognized that these are under threat from climate change, ranging from rising sea levels to the frequency and intensity of storms that they are facing. So what approach did they take? So Blue Alliance combined technical and business assistance with a catalytic finance mechanism for MPAs, marine protected areas. They've engaged, as I mentioned, private sector, particularly in initiatives such as ecotourism, as well as other small and medium scale enterprises, and developed innovative co-management leases with governments, with the local government and communities, in order to build on existing knowledge, skills, and partnerships and grow this further. The project has achieved, in this really short duration, considering that this is a small grant, they've achieved quite a lot. They've set up 11 marine protected area agreements, which are co-managed by the communities and the government. They've affected, or at least helped about 1,000 people to increase the sources of protein, increase their income, and as well as access new jobs. But this number extrapolates further when you think about the communities in general. With the increased or improved management of the marine ecosystems, it affects a lot more people, up to the thousands. And they have 5 programs that they have set up related to the fisheries, the ecosystem, community-based aquaculture, as well as mangrove restoration. And this is one of the ones that have actually mobilized blended finance of over $500,000 by the time the project was completed. So the second example that we have, we're going across all the way to Latin America into Costa Rica. This project is implemented by ECOM and the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and it's focused on cacao agroforestry or cocoa agroforestry. So this project is interesting because it aims to remove the technical, financial, and value chain barriers against farmers, or for farmers who are trying to participate in the cocoa. The National Cocoa Plan, I think is what it's called, the Costa Rica National Cocoa Plan, all the while reducing their vulnerability to the changing climate. This grantee received about $250,000, and this was back in 2022 as well, December, and they're currently still implementing. The focus here was on scaling up cocoa agroforestry using a landscape restoration approach. And they have supported cocoa producers. They've supported people in the value chain actors to adopt agroforestry, and climate smart practices. The project has also helped farmers to transition those who have been affected by climate change to transition to cocoa production where it is viable. By promoting this agroforestry, the projects not only boost the biodiversity, but also conserve key areas and enhance ecosystem services in the region. So in the long run, this project aims to build awareness around agroforestry and its importance, to highlight gaps in governance in the production chains, the value chains, as well as work towards sustainable financing that would help to support the farmers in the area. So far, they've made really excellent strides. They have affected 275 hectares in total, working in about 48 farms and affecting about 1,500 cocoa farmers, both as direct and indirect beneficiaries. So as I wrap up, I'd like to encourage you to visit the fund website, which is on the screen, and I'll also drop it in the chat, where you'll get to see and read about a different range of grantees that we have on board. They work in different ecosystems. They work and target different communities. They work and target different things. So some are working on policy, some are working on addressing knowledge gaps. And so all of this information will be available on the website. I will drop it to you. And if you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to contact us as the Secretariat, and the contacts are there as well. Thank you very much, and over to you, Radhika. I think I managed to do it in the time I was meant to.
Yes,
so
perfect. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you, Nora. That was very interesting. And I have a couple of questions, but I'm going to open up the floor for discussion for 10 minutes. I think we are well within our time, so we can take 10 minutes for the first three speakers to have a Q&A, and then we will go on to the last two speakers with more examples from different countries. So I see that there are two questions in the chat. And I also would encourage anyone to just raise their hands, and we will unmute you and we can have a discussion. So the first question is from Sixto Palacios, is it? Sharon, are you unmuting the audience?
No, I will only unmute those who have raised their hands. So
I see. Okay.
The question is, yeah, in the Q&A button. I think, I'm not sure if Eva or Sasha it is addressed to or answering.
Okay, so in the, are there any hands raised? I saw one, but I don't see it any longer.
There's a question for Nora in the Q&A button as well. And I think the first question is actually directed towards Sasha, because I think he referred to KPIs in his presentation. So maybe that's what it refers to.
Okay, so let me read out the questions, and then we can start from there. So Sasha, there's a question here on what type of KPI should be used to close that gap. I think you had mentioned key performance indicators in one of your slides around the finance gap.
So what we have seen in our study is that clearly defined key performance indicators are quite important in order to get financing done and in order to get the right outputs in the financial solutions. So what we started to look on the back of the study is to start with TNFD, which presents quite a significant amount of different KPIs, and look already how these KPIs can be how adaptation related aspects can be incorporated in those KPIs. At the end, we need to start somewhere, and there are two ways. Either we start on the adaptation side and we add the nature bit into it, or we start on the nature side and we add the adaptation bit into it. And because like on the nature side especially, there has been quite significant progress over the last couple of months or years on the TNFD side, there are certain tables and KPI directories which we can use, but we need to thoroughly analyze and identify those. And this is like the next step within our progress or process in order to get to the next level.
Mm-hmm. Radhika, if you want, I can also jump in with a quick comment on that.
Yeah,
so maybe,
go ahead, please. Yeah.
Maybe it's not specifically KPI, but like disclosure metrics when it comes more to private sector companies maybe taking action on climate and nature. The frameworks and standards that I mentioned before, they list a number of recommended like disclosure metrics. If you go on TNFD, like they have some core metrics that they mostly cover, like for example, water, like pollution of water, plastic pollution, and obviously also all the climate related emissions, so scope 1, 2, and 3 of climate CO2 emission in the atmospheres on the climate side. So there are a number of like recommended ones from different disclosure and frameworks. GRI also has a number of, for example, metrics for the impacts on nature that are kind of already interoperable with, for example, the TNFD ones. There is a very nice table online, and I can pop the link in the chat with all the different metrics that have been kind of developed, and all they kind of connect to each other. So there are a number of instruments out there. I think very often the question is, what are those that are material and that are really relevant to look into for the company, and that are really relevant to evaluate and disclose, or to select for a specific, maybe in the case of developing a finance solution, more in the KPI context. But I will pop the link in the chat. It can be interesting.
Thank you. Thanks, Eva. Thanks, Sasha, for the response. I want to see if there are any hands up. I don't see any hands up, but I see a few questions in.
I can answer that second question.
Yeah, Nora, please go ahead. I
Okay.
see you're typing. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay, so thank you. I don't want to say the name and butcher it completely. So Bate, and thank you so much for the question. So you asked about how UNEP and the Global EBA Fund can help the country of Cameroon and other African countries address the issues that you're facing. There's a lot of disasters that are happening right now, and increasingly so with the changing climate. We are having a longer and longer droughts that are affecting communities, for example, in northern Cameroon. So my direction to you at this point would be to, if you would like to apply to the fund, to partner with a local organization that is there, that's working, and apply to the fund. And you can actually focus on this as a key area that you would like to address. So if you'd like to strengthen the capacities of the local communities, of the local governments, which will essentially build the resilience of the countries and of these vulnerable countries from the bottom going up. And so we do have projects. For example, we have one in Kenya where we have a flood warning system along a river in a slum area. And they've used something very simple. They have used a flag system where upstream, if there was somebody sees water up the stream, they call the guys downstream, and these guys put up these flags, which will warn the communities and the local people who live in that area. So this is a system, or that's a solution that's been adapted to the local environment where they are. Why? Because of the density of the communities that live there. And so for me, I often say, and what we've learned from this fund is a lot of the solutions actually come from the countries and from the ground themselves. And what is often lacking is the financing for them to be able to implement or pilot or showcase some of these innovations. And through the fund, the Global EBA Fund as an example, you can actually use and access small grants like these for you to be able to demonstrate certain abilities for you to be able to improve your forecasting, improve and strengthen the capacities of local communities, just to build resilience for them against this changing climate. I don't know if I've answered you, but I'll also type in the comment section just to provide additional information. Back to you, Radhika.
Thank you. Thanks, Nora. I see one other question in the chat, in the Q&A tab, that I'm going to bring up here. This is from Korean Lolim, and it's to Alexander and Nora, but I think all three panelists can take a stab at it. So the question is, some countries lack national legislations to regulate or sufficient regulations to regulate the environmental issues. And so these are interlinked environment climate issues. What could be the possible ways to use that can then in this context be used to address both climate change and I would add your environmental issues in this situation? And I can perhaps add to this question, which is particularly around regulations that involve the financial industry. If there are situations, and there are many, where we don't have a sufficient regulatory background or framework, how do we go about addressing some of these gaps? Sasha, you want to take the first stab and then hand over to Nora and Eva?
Yes. So in case where there's no national regulation on its own, and we see it in kind of a couple of countries where voluntary standards are used by local communities and in local context in order to implement environmental and climate related issues. So, and this is kind of the recommendations we have in different countries is the first of all, even like for the regulators and the authorities, start with voluntary standards and voluntary requirements, and then move into regulations and mandatory ones. And because like one challenging part is nature doesn't stop at the border. So climate change doesn't stop at the border. So we need some regional solutions or localized solutions which go across borders. And this is where we start in some of the countries. So I'm currently in Kazakhstan, and Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan, they're kind of like in a similar region, facing similar problems. And one of the solutions is try to create cross-national voluntary standards which can be implemented, and then move into regulations. I'll stop here.
Yeah, thank you, Sasha. Eva or Nora, if you'd like to weigh in on this question, and otherwise we can also move on to the next two speakers.
Yeah, maybe just mentioning that I think, especially when it comes to also, really redirecting finance also from the private sector, like kind of creating that enabling environment out there. It should not be underestimated. So really the policies should be out there to facilitate and enable then the private sector to be able to invest also in a sustainable way. So even like green taxonomies we have seen on the rise when it comes not only for the public budgeting, but on the private side too. For example, we are now supporting the regional taxonomy, green taxonomy, biodiversity specific taxonomy this time for the LAC region, to really also enable, and provide those tools to really facilitate countries to develop the national taxonomies when it comes to facilitate private sector investments. And BIOFIN has been supporting also other like enabling environmental policies to, for example, facilitate the issuance of green bonds. We had the case of Zambia, where we had tax rates for green bonds issuance for investors, as well as kind of setting up the green bond framework before, actually working on the green bond issuance. So then has been announced, I believe, last year, one of the first corporate bonds, green bonds for Zambia. So yeah, many different actions that can be taken, and having that framework in enabling environment before it's really super important.
Thank you. Thanks, Eva. Nora, would you?
Maybe just to quickly add the importance of the indigenous and traditional knowledge systems. So we keep talking about governance, about closing policy gaps and everything, and a lot of time implementing them on the ground would often fail or be challenged. So the importance of actually taking what exists and either reinforcing them, strengthening them, or if they're negative, finding ways around them, working with and through the communities in order for you to actually build governance systems from the ground going up. So it's, as Alex has actually mentioned, that policy and governance is actually important. I think this can actually be applied at different levels, even in local community, local governments with the cities, working at regulations that are applicable to the areas, and taking there's a lot of information right now, and thank God for the internet. There's a lot of information, so cross learnings and actually seeing how other cities, how other communities do it, what are some of the solutions and innovations that exist, and then how to apply this to your policies. But I think I wanted to just highlight the importance of ITK, indigenous and traditional knowledge.
Thank you. Thanks, Nora. Excellent point. And thank you, Sasha and Eva. We'll close the Q&A for now and move on to our next speakers. And then we'll have 10 minutes at the end for more Q&A. Thank you. Thanks again. So I want to introduce our next speaker, Annabelle Trinidad, who's a senior technical advisor with UNDP's Biodiversity Finance Initiative, BIOFIN, and working in the Philippines, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, and several other countries. And she's been supporting these countries in the implementation of the BIOFIN methodology and in the initiation of some of the finance solutions. She will share her experiences from this field, from specifically Indonesia and Malaysia, and particularly on BIOFIN, on biodiversity finance solutions, and also how this then links to support for adaptation. Abby, over to you, please. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Radhika, and greetings to everyone on this webinar. It's a pleasure to be to join you tonight. It's night for me, so sorry about that, but I'm sure some of you are still in the early morning or afternoon. So I think the question that I want to answer is whether BIOFIN is also doing finance solutions on climate adaptation. And I think the answer is a qualified yes. Yes, BIOFIN is working on climate adaptation for actions with a strong biodiversity co-benefit. And let me spend the next minutes to describe how our work in the Philippines and in Indonesia, specifically on the biodiversity and climate change nexus, has evolved. And I'd like to point out some similarities and differences in the approach of both countries. But one similarity is the starting point, which is always the climate tagging. So BIOFIN engaged in climate tagging to advocate for also a tagging in biodiversity expenditures in order for us to have a better estimate. But also the long-term view is to be able to achieve some synergies between climate finance and biodiversity finance. Can we have the next slide, please? All right, so let me start with the Philippines. We've been working a lot with the Climate Change Commission, which already developed a standardized climate change typology and a coding structure. There is a policy that governs this particular tagging initiative, and BIOFIN is still trying to insert and encourage the tagging system to be expanded to include biodiversity. When we did our own biodiversity expenditure review back in, I think that 2015, 2016, we used budget data from 2008 to 2018 for more than 50 government agencies. And we developed our own expenditure tagging system with our own biodiversity attribution weights with the guidance of the BIOFIN workbook. But very recently, I think in last month or so, we have revised this methodology using the GLOBE taxonomy. I know that there has been a lot of mention about taxonomies, but I'd like to say that this GLOBE, or Global Biodiversity Expenditure Taxonomy, is a taxonomy for the public sector. So basically, it is a listing of actions that help match government interventions with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And it also comes with biodiversity attribution rates based on expert knowledge. We are also trying in the Philippines to have an M&E platform that is housed in the Biodiversity Management Bureau that will track biodiversity expenditures across government and private sectors. Next slide, please. All right, so what are the planned interventions? First, as I said, we would still want to include biodiversity expenditures in the current climate change expenditure tagging system of the CCC, of the Climate Change Commission, sorry. But what might be very interesting is this. So we plan to work with several government agencies, but for now we want to work with the Department of Public Works and Highways to develop guidelines on nature-based infrastructure solutions for flood control and mitigation. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to elaborate a little bit on that particular adaptation and biodiversity action that we would like to take, we analyze the National Adaptation Plan of the Philippines and the National Expenditure Program, okay? And we were able to identify which agencies have significant budgets for adaptation where some biodiversity co-benefits exist. And this includes the Department of Public Works and Highways. It includes also the Agricultural Department. It also includes the Insurance Department. But we have selected as a pilot the Department of Public Works and Highways for 3 reasons. One is that it has the highest financing available. I think it's more than 88 billion pesos. And that's, let me just check the numbers, 88 billion pesos. So, gosh, okay, never mind. 88 billion pesos is the highest of all the agencies which we have identified. And the other reason is that the department is very active in the steering committee of BIOFIN. And the last is, over the last couple of weeks, we have always been experiencing flooding. And therefore, we thought that this would be a very strategic move in order to try to implement some of this climate-related action with some biodiversity component. All right, so as I said, okay, just moving on to what are the long-term objectives are. So I just want to focus on the upper box, which is to develop programs of work with relevant government agencies on designing ecological infrastructure, production systems, livelihood schemes, and risks mechanisms to contribute to the twin goals of climate and biodiversity action. Okay, so next slide, please. We can move on to Indonesia. So in Indonesia, we are also working on climate budget tagging as well as biodiversity budget tagging. When we started with Indonesia, we were working with the Ministry of Finance. And now during the implementation phase, we have moved to the BAPENAS, or the National Development Planning Agency. So you will see that there are 2 types of tagging. Climate tagging is more entrenched in the relevant government agency, while biodiversity is not yet there. Biodiversity is in a more flexible, more transitional type of tagging, which we call the dynamic tagging, and it is housed in BAPENAS. What I just want to point out is that because it is housed in BAPENAS, we are able to make the connection between the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan of Indonesia to the biodiversity expenditures. And I just want to highlight one of the bullet points that is listed here, where both dynamic, it's the 4th bullet point, both dynamic and thematic tagging are able to reflect climate action and biodiversity action, and are able to show intersections and interlinkage between the 2 tagging in each of the line ministries. So again, we may be able to achieve some synergies in not only planning for actions, but also trying to use finance more efficiently. Next slide, please. So the work of BIOFIN in Indonesia in terms of biodiversity budget tracking will focus on utilizing the existing dynamic tagging, for which we have already tracked a significant amount of funds. Just from 2022 up to date, we have already tracked more than $1 billion that are biodiversity relevant expenditures. But as I said, because there is the possibility to also track it together with climate, then it becomes a more powerful tool. As to the future activities of BIOFIN in Indonesia in terms of this tagging, we can see that the activities will focus on identification of biodiversity programs and activities in relevant ministries or institutions, development of criteria and classification of biodiversity expenditure types, integrated into the National Development Planning and Budgeting System, and development of guidelines for relevant ministries or institutions. And what do we expect out of it? So it's a better functioning biodiversity expenditure tracking system. So if the biodiversity expenditure review is institutionalized, and some countries have already done this, then it will be very beneficial for a country to be able to have this biodiversity expenditure tracking system. And of course, the ultimate objective is to have a better and more effective allocation of expenditures to support the management of Indonesia's biodiversity. Next slide. So in conclusion, for both countries, we see that there is desire to continue working to institutionalize tagging as a means towards better policy alignment and better measurement of expenditures. Indonesia, the ultimate objective is to really increase budgets for biodiversity. I'd like to stress again that because the dynamic tagging is linked to the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, this becomes highly possible. And also, of course, on the other hand, what we'd like is to be able to effectively use the money and to connect the activities and the budgets with KPIs. In the Philippines, we also want to achieve efficient spending for climate and biodiversity, but we also want to start working to develop nature-based solutions that would address climate and biodiversity loss. And for us, this is really new territory because it means that we have to work closer with maybe scientists, engineers, those who will really advise us on how climate and biodiversity actions can really be beneficial and to maximize the co-benefits. So before I end, I also want to mention that there are a few tools already available from the BIOFIN offerings that can be used to further analyze and elaborate on this issue on the biodiversity and climate nexus. And one was already mentioned by Alex a while ago, which is the catalog of finance solutions. It would really be beneficial to also look at the climate filter of all of these solutions. So that's one. The other one is our biodiversity workbook. Now it is focused on biodiversity, but it can easily be adapted and to include some of the climate issues. The third that I'd like to point out is, of course, the Globe taxonomy, which I mentioned a while ago, which is a public sector taxonomy, which features a list of different actions that can be categorized as either biodiversity or climate. So I think I will end there, and thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Abby. That was excellent and also brings up many questions. But I want to move on to our next speaker before we open up for the final Q&A. So our next speaker is Berhanu Asefa. He's a national program coordinator for the SCALA initiative, which is scaling up climate ambition in agriculture and land use sectors. It's an initiative jointly implemented by UNDP and FAO and various government ministries. Berhanu's work has been focused on strengthening evidence-based and enabling environment for the implementation of Ethiopia's National Adaptation Plan and NDCs. focusing particularly on the agriculture and land use sectors. He has served as the director of the Environment and Climate Change Coordination Directorate at the Ministry of Agriculture in Ethiopia, and has over 2 decades of experience in sustainable natural resource management. Berhan, could you please share with us some experiences from SCALA's work in Ethiopia, how the support to climate action in agriculture and land use sector is also integrating addressing nature conservation needs or restoration needs? And the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. It is my pleasure to share Ethiopia's experience on the implementation of a SCALA program. A SCALA program has been implemented in Ethiopia since 2021. When we are trying to implement the SCALA's objective in Ethiopian context, we try to identify the landscape system which can help us to bring transformations at landscape level. Our entry point of implementation of SCALA in Ethiopia is using the landscape, what we call as watershed, and we identified the actions those can positively interact within the watershed to that can bring the landscape transformation and also attain social and economic development as well as environmental sustainability. Our more focus is integrated natural resource management to improve the ecosystem service within the watershed that can help us to increase adaptive capacity of the community or as well as a system, and also have mitigation dimension which can reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from the watershed. This landscape management also can improve the accessibility of water that we can use for irrigation as well as the livestock at the community level, which can improve the incomes of the community, that enhance adaptive capacity of the community, because one of the climate driven risk in Ethiopia is drought. Our agriculture is mostly based on rain-fed agriculture. To detach these issues from the rain-fed, irrigation is one of the priority area to enhance the availability of water availability. Integrated natural resource management is contributing for this one. The other one is in agricultural sector. The livestock sector is one of the important area, which is the most of the communities in the pastoralist area as well as in the middle highland areas is the livestock. The problem is the access to feed is very problematic due to the impact of the climate change. With this watershed management can enhance the availability of feed for the livestock, and we try to promote the livestock those have the low emission, especially poultry and small ruminant animals in this program, because in order to at least reduce the emission from the livestock sector and give both adaptation and mitigation dimension for these activities. At the end of the day, we thinking to have the transformation at landscape level and also address social and economic and environmental issues at the end of the day. Unless and otherwise, in this changing climate, the sustainability is very difficult. So in order to, while we are implementing the SCALA's objective in this watershed, we conducted the system level assessments in order to generate information on transformative climate actions. Those can be able us to bring transformation at the community level within the landscape. This assessment, this assessment is included three things. The first one is information generation on transformative adaptation and the climate action. The second one is to value chain analysis on the gender responsive climate actions. Those can address the gender issues and also can include the gender dimension. The other one is to try to map the private sector opportunities area where we can engaging the private sectors at the local and the national level. Yeah, when we are conducting the transformation, we try to identify a lot of transformative climate action at different subsectors, but I try to present those have direct linkage with the nature-based solution. In the natural resource management sector, the assessment has identified integrated natural resource management. When we call integrated natural resource management, it's focusing on both physical and biological soil water conservation. Those can addresses the land degradations and also improve the ecosystems of the area. The other one is area closure is one of the area we try to close the areas from interference of human being and the livestock, and also as promoting assisted natural regeneration to reclamations of the degraded areas. The other one is agroforestry. Agroforestry is one of the potential area which can address the climate issues, especially food and nutrition security, due to its diverse nature and the resistance or adapted to the climate change. This is the activities those can contribute for the nature-based solution in the natural resource sector. When we come to the livestock sector, we identified a lot by this assessment, but we are trying to focusing in some issues. One is the livestock animal value chain efficiency is very important. As you know, Ethiopia as one of the first country in livestock number. This livestock number can affected by the drought is due to the climate change, and it is also affect the natural resources by creating the pressure on the rangelands. And this assessment is identified on how to enhance the productivity of parade of animal rather than the numbers of the livestock. The other one is the issue of the feed. Due to the climate change, the feed is very scarce, and the livestock is in problem. The improved improved feed promotions and range land management is the area identified by the assessment in the livestock sector. The other is one of the focus area in Ethiopia is in the livestock sector is promoting of poultry and the small ruminant, especially sheep and the goat is critical one in order to address the food security as well as nutrient security. This activity is inclusive when compared to the other, the women and users can easily engage in this sector. The other one is in the crop subsector. Conservation agriculture is identified. This can also increases the adaptive capacity as well as soil fertility through process and can attain sustainable agriculture productivity. The other is organic fertilizer is very important area we need to focus on, especially we have a lot of livestock. We can prepare the compost from this area, and we can keep the soil fertilities and the soil healthy by using such activities. The other one is soil fertility management and integrated pest management is the area identified by assessment in the crop sector. This is the areas already identified and the informations generated in order to scale up in as SCALA activities as mainstreaming in the regular government development programs at local and the national level, because the assessment is conducted in 3 different agroecological zonations and the livelihood system. At least this can help us to scale up those informations in the similar agroecological zonations and the farming systems. The other area identified by this assessment is the other area identified is gender responsive value chains identified in 3 agroecological zonation. Women can engage, also private sectors can engage these areas. Based on these informations generated through the assessment, local climate smart agriculture mainstreamed plan is developed for these 3 districts, which we can going to implement through the top-up support from SCALA Global in the coming in the next year. The other is we also conducted the private sector engagement assessment. This is also conducted. This assessment is based on the system level assessment. During the system level assessment, we try to
À noter l'importance du secteur privé. Lors de cette évaluation, nous avons essayé d'identifier les acteurs du secteur privé qui agissent au niveau local et au niveau national. Et nous essayons l'importance du secteur privé.
The engagement of the private sectors and other stakeholders is very critical in order to attain the objectives and also reduce the impact and the risks of the climate, especially in agricultural sector. This assessment is mainly
Berhanu, sorry to interrupt you, but we have 1 minute to wrap up your interventions, so that we will have some time.
I can manage it. Sorry.
Thank you.
This assessment may identify the risks and opportunities in the private sector, especially there is different opportunities where the private sectors can engage by providing the organic inputs, the composts, biopesticide, biofertilizer at large scale, which can support the adaptation of the climate action. As the barriers is these interventions are low attractivity for the climate actors, especially agroforestry and others, because the private sectors are always run with the profit. It can, the return may not come within short period of time unless and otherwise we link with the carbon market. The other area of de-risking solutions is identified for the private sector. In this area is especially when we are promoting private sector to engage in input sector, we have to the standards and enabling environment is very important in order to encourage this business and engagements of the private sector. The other one is capacity building is very important. Not how to access the loans and the finances in order to promote their businesses, both in a demand and the supply side is very important. Unless otherwise, it is difficult to implement. Capacity building is one of the area we are focusing on next to the finance. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bernard. This was a very detailed explanation of the SCALA initiative in Ethiopia, and I know there's a lot more information that you have on this initiative, and I hope some of that can come out in a question and answer. So everyone, we have about 10 minutes left, and I would really encourage you to either put your question in the Q&A or raise your hand. I do see one question from Bertrand in Q&A from earlier, and I will start with that while there are other questions that are raised. And so the question here was, IPCC report alerts readers to the fact that several nature-based solutions are themselves very sensitive to climate change. Are we paying enough attention to this in our practice and in the quality assurance for existing taxonomies as well as KPIs? I will try to answer part of this question, Bertrand, and I also would invite Nora to share her perspectives from the viewpoint of the Global EBA Fund, because this is a very, very pertinent question. I think when we look at ecosystem-based adaptation or nature-based solutions, particularly in the realm of adaptation, we're looking at two things. One is the definition focuses on the use of ecosystems and biodiversity to support adaptive capacity and adaptation for people and communities and society at large. But we know that with climate change, and we've seen this in the last few years, particularly with the number of wildfires, the flooding, the widespread impacts that we're seeing across the globe, that the very ecosystems that we rely on for critical services, for hazard reduction or reducing the exposure of people and communities and cities to hazards, the resilience of these ecosystems is undermined already. So I think the question here then becomes, how are we integrating nature, not only how are we integrating nature-based solutions into broader development planning and adaptation, but also how are we incorporating actions for ensuring that ecosystems, biodiversity, also have a space for adapting. And in this, I think there is a lot of issues to unpack. But I want to invite Nora. Nora, from the perspective of the Global Ecosystem-Based Adaptation Fund, this is a very pertinent issue, and I wonder if you had any discussions on this with IUCN, with others in the space, and could weigh in. And of course, also if other panelists would like to come in on this, I would also encourage other perspectives. Thank you. Nora, over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Radhika. So this is a very timely and I think pertinent issue to discuss, because as Radhika has just mentioned, the rate at which the climate is changing is outstripping the ecosystem's capacity and ability to actually respond as they were before. This doesn't help that we have actually degraded our ecosystems as they are right now. So their capacity and ability to bounce back has decreased significantly. So it's interesting, the same topic was discussed during the recent EBA Knowledge Day that we had in Bonn on the sidelines of the subsidiary body meeting held in Bonn in June. And one of the things we actually talked about is how adaptation needs to happen quicker. Adaptation, we need to fail faster. So we need to be able to have things that allow us to test out innovations quickly so that we can test whether they work or they don't work. Because typically, unfortunately, a lot of projects that we implement take so long to design, take so long to start implementing. By the time you're actually implementing, the challenges you're facing are so much more than they were before, right? And that's why you have small mechanisms like we have, say, through the Global EBA Fund that allows you to take this money, test out a small whatever, pilot it and see, does this innovation work? Does this solution that we thought about work? And if it doesn't, then you fail fast and move forward, fail forward essentially, fail forward. And I think that's the thing we need to start thinking about. How can we accelerate our ability to actually take on adaptation measures quicker? Otherwise, for example, we're creating a national adaptation plans. If we're not able to do such innovations, then our national adaptation plans will be ineffective by the time they're trying to implement them 5 years from now. So yes, I think my big recommendation is that we need to find mechanisms to fail forward, fail fast, and so that we can be able to find effective adaptation solutions. A second thing is the reality is a lot of our communities live in cities right now. And so there's a lot of discussions about nature-based infrastructure, actually bringing nature back into our cities, bringing nature back into our schools, greening infrastructure so that we can make these infrastructure more resilient and less likely to be damaged, for example, by your typical storm, not the once in 100-year storms, which are another story altogether, but just so that we can be able to get through these storms, droughts, etc., these disasters that we're facing in the short term, and that the infrastructure that we have would be able to be resilient. So using nature to build resilience in our cities and in our communities. Yeah, back to you, Radhika.
Thank you, Nora. No, this is a very interesting question, and I think we could talk about this for a long time with everyone. So I want to open up the floor for other questions. I don't see any. I see one more question in the. No, I do not see any more questions in the Q&A. Saran, I believe you had a question. Would you like to come in?
Yes, sure. Thank you so much to all our speakers and all our participants as well. It's been great to listen. And I was wondering, I have Abby, when you were presenting about the budget tagging, climate budget tagging, biodiversity budget tagging, expenditure reviews, I think I may have missed it, but I was wondering how this exercises affect financing, because I think you mentioned at the end of the day, we do want finance for climate and nature and biodiversity, and whether this tools that you have mentioned, how that affects. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Saran, for the question. One clear linkage of the expenditure reviews to financing is to try to assess the alignment of current expenditures with what the policy says. And oftentimes we see the discrepancy between policy priorities and what is actually being funded, but for both climate and for biodiversity. And sometimes also, I think it's very prudent for us to be able to do the best estimate of biodiversity and or climate expenditures, especially for future plans, when we want to prepare some investment scenarios, when we want to ask for donor assistance. This is all a very critical source of information that we must be able to provide, and we must be able to provide well. It is a bit difficult for biodiversity because it's not a sector in itself. So, and that's why I keep on referring to some of the methodologies that we have developed to help really carve out the biodiversity spending, especially from non-core biodiversity agencies, where we see a lot of potential also for funding. So it's not just the core agencies, but we, as I said earlier, a lot of institutions spend for biodiversity, and we must be able to capture that. And that all contributes to financing eventually.
Thank you, Abby. And with that, I think we have to close the webinar. So I want to thank all the panelists, and I want to thank all the participants. I think we had a lot of interesting and very informative presentations and questions that have triggered discussion, and that I hope will continue beyond this webinar. I also want to request you, if you can, to fill out the survey that will pop up once you leave the webinar. We'd be very grateful if you could do that. The next webinar will be, the next APA webinar will be scheduled for 17th of October on private sector engagement for adaptation. And we look forward to seeing you there as well.